Before we begin, if you value independent analysis of world affairs, psychology, history, and political power, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Give this video a like and share it with others. Your support helps these discussions reach a wider audience and encourages open dialogue on important global issues. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. Today, we are going to place a horrific scene under our analytical microscope, a bleak testament to how power, once stripped of human dignity, manifests in its most grotesque and hypocritical forms within the arena of international politics. Since the outbreak of the war in February 2022, the total number of casualties on both sides of the Russia-Ukraine conflict has already crossed a staggering 2 million. Even as unspeakable war crimes and anti-human massacres are being perpetrated in this civilized 21st century, we on the other side of the globe live our daily lives in tranquil complacency, smiling and carrying on as if nothing were amiss. However, this nightmare is not confined to distant lands. On the other side of the planet, South Korea, once a proud, advanced democracy, is systematically modeling itself after Venezuela. Barbaric acts and human rights, violations that are unacceptable in a civilized world, are unfolding as we speak. Tragically, the international press remains dead silent. The current ultra-left regime now finds its political legitimacy heavily questioned, even by the United States, traditionally viewed as a bastion of democracy due to continuing allegations surrounding election transparency. The behavior exhibited by the leader of this regime represents the very pinnacle of hypocrisy and autocracy. While donning a mask of public benevolence, he is driven entirely by a desire to dominate, dissecting and controlling nearly every aspect of citizens' daily lives. He dictates consumer choices, pressures corporations on investment decisions, and promotes highly publicized government projects to cultivate the image of a benevolent ruler. Beneath this public image, however, the narrative argues that media organizations raising election concerns are pressured through advertising restrictions. Foreign companies face severe penalties, and critics, including those overseas, are subjected to legal action. State institutions are portrayed as instruments of political control. The criticism extends further, alleging harsh treatment of religious leaders and ordinary citizens, while political allies receive preferential treatment. Within this atmosphere, the leader is depicted as believing himself to be the unquestioned center of political reality. Yet the moment this domestic stage expands into the international arena, that carefully constructed image begins to unravel. Inside the vast halls of international summits, where credibility, trust, and national reputation matter more than domestic authority, no leader receives automatic respect. There, the gap between political image and international perception becomes impossible to conceal. This is presented not merely as a diplomatic setback. It is described as the psychological collapse of an ego intoxicated by power, the erosion of international trust and reputation, and from the perspective of Eastern philosophy, the inevitable collision between illusion and reality. If you found this analysis thought-provoking, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with others. Your support enables independent discussions like this to continue and helps broaden the conversation. No human ego can remain in a state of profound shame for very long. If left unprotected, overwhelming humiliation threatens a person's psychological survival. To defend itself, the brain immediately begins reconstructing reality, not by changing the external world, but by changing its interpretation of that world. Instead of accepting the painful truth, I am being ignored, the mind quietly replaces it with a far more comforting narrative. They are not avoiding me because I have failed. They simply cannot approach someone of my stature. Or perhaps I choose to stand apart. I have no interest in participating in their shallow diplomatic socializing. This is not objective reasoning. It is psychological self-preservation. Modern psychology describes this process as cognitive dissonance, reduction, the mind's attempt to eliminate the unbearable tension that arises when reality collides with one's self-image. the greater the gap between how we see ourselves and how the world responds to us, the more desperately we attempt to rewrite reality. Criminal psychology offers striking parallels. When narcissistic offenders are exposed, they often refuse to acknowledge guilt. Instead, they proclaim, "I broke the law to awaken society. History will eventually understand me. Everyone else is corrupt. I alone acted with integrity." Such statements are examples of criminal rationalization. The purpose is not to discover truth. The purpose is to protect the ego from collapse. The symbolic teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead describe a remarkably similar stage known as Chunyed Bardo, the bardo of experiencing reality. In this symbolic state, one's accumulated mental habits, attachments, and desires manifest as vivid visions. These visions do not originate from the external world. They arise from the mind itself. Likewise, the isolated leader begins walking voluntarily into a fog, created by his own pride. Rather than admitting loneliness, he transforms himself into the image of the, quote, lone wolf, a misunderstood visionary standing above ordinary people. His wounded pride is temporarily stitched together with fantasies of superiority. Yet beneath this carefully constructed identity, the original wound remains unhealed. The illusion merely postpones the inevitable confrontation with reality. Stage 3. Projection and anger, the appearance of the wrathful gods. Eventually, even rationalization reaches its limits. The psychological dam can hold back humiliation only for so long. When it finally breaks, suppressed shame undergoes a dramatic transformation. It becomes anger. The leader's hostility no longer turns inward. Instead, it is projected outward. Every foreign leader who ignored him becomes an enemy. Every journalist who reported the event becomes a conspirator. Every camera becomes an instrument of humiliation. The internal dialogue changes. How dare they insult me? How dare they disrespect my nation? This is the classic psychological defense known as projection. Unable to acknowledge painful emotions within himself, the individual attributes malicious intentions to others. Criminal psychology frequently observes this phenomenon. Psychopathic offenders often accuse their own victims. A violent abuser may insist, "You made me do it. If you hadn't provoked me, I would never have attacked you." Responsibility is transferred from the perpetrator to the victim. The same psychological architecture appears here. The leader no longer experiences himself as the source of the crisis. He becomes the victim of an imagined global conspiracy. His own failures disappear behind accusations directed toward everyone else. The symbolic language of the Tibetan Book of the Dead portrays this stage through the appearance of the wrathful deities, known in Tibetan tradition as herukas. Beginning several days after death, terrifying divine figures appear before the consciousness. To a mind clouded by fear and attachment, these beings seem like horrifying monsters intent on destruction. The soul screams in terror. It believes hostile forces have surrounded it. Yet the text delivers a profound philosophical insight. These terrifying figures are not external enemies. They are manifestations of one's own mind. They are the visible forms of anger, hatred, pride, attachment, and fear accumulated throughout life. The monster has always lived within. Likewise, the leader surrounded by perceived enemies is not confronting an objective reality. He is confronting reflections of his own unresolved emotions. The hostility he projects onto the international community is in many respects the external image of the resentment, already consuming his inner world. His reputation becomes a blade that seems to wound him from every direction. But the deepest cuts are inflicted not by diplomats or journalists. They are inflicted by the illusions he has spent years constructing around himself. At this stage, truth becomes almost impossible to recognize. The louder reality speaks, the more fiercely the ego defends itself. The more isolated the individual becomes, the more convinced he grows that the entire world is persecuting him. This is one of the greatest tragedies, described by both psychology and philosophy. A person who can no longer distinguish between external reality and internal illusion gradually imprisons himself inside a psychological fortress one whose walls are built from fear, pride, and self-deception. From the outside, he still appears powerful. Inside, however, the foundations are already collapsing. If you believe these discussions are worth having, please subscribe, share this video with others, and click the like button. Your support helps expand meaningful conversations and allows this channel to continue producing independent analysis.